new tutoring service. Today's video is part of our teacher series, and we will be delving into classroom management. Before we get into this video, please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Classroom management is such a broad topic. Some teachers have spent years developing a classroom management system and style that fits them and their classes. Other teachers may not have thought much about it. But I believe that having the right classroom management system in place is beneficial for both you and your students. How so? Well, with the right classroom management system and style in place, it will help to thwart certain negative behaviors that may occur in your classroom, and it will allow you the time, the precious time at that, needed to teach your students the concepts and the curriculum that you are to teach. And so today, we're going to look at some tips to help you to begin to develop or to help you to enhance your classroom management system. So KIP tip number 1, build positive relationships. Now, building positive relationships may look different from classroom to classroom. I'm not saying that you should become your students' best friends. As my former administrator would say, we as adults have nothing in common with 12 and 13-year-olds. What I am saying is that we should see our students as more than just their student ID number, as more than just a name on a roster, as more than just a score on a test. We want them to know that we value them, that we see them as people. So one way that we can build positive relationships with our students is by getting to know their interests outside of the classroom. Are they into arts? Are they into sports? Do they have a pet at home? Do they have siblings? These are things that we can do to get to know them better. And when I say do, I mean there are activities that we can put in place that will help us to get to know them outside of the classroom. If you have not checked out our video on KIP tips for the first day of school lesson plans, go ahead and check that out. Because in that video, we talked about some getting to know you activities that you can do to get to know them. And if you did not do that on the first day of school, it's not too late. The semester isn't over, so you can go ahead and just incorporate a getting to know you activity in one of your lesson plans. One of the things that I used to do was celebrate my students' birthdays. Now, I am a former special education public school teacher, and so my class size was very small compared to my general education colleagues. And so I was able to celebrate each student's birthdays individually. What did I do? Well, I went and got a poster, a happy birthday poster, from Dollar Tree. You can go to Walmart, or you can order it online from Amazon. But it was a small happy birthday poster, very generic, and I would put it on their desk on their birthday. If their birthday fell on the weekend, then I would put it there on that Friday before. And so when they walked into the classroom, there was this happy birthday sign on their desk. I also would bring in miniature cupcakes or cookies to celebrate with the class. If you are a general education teacher, that might be a little bit much considering that your class sizes are way bigger than the typical special education classroom. So I had a colleague that what they did was they had a laminated calendar outside of their classroom. And so each month they would identify what students in their classes had birthdays in that month, and they would write their names and the birthday on that laminated calendar. And so when their students came in on that day, or when they would come in that month, they would be able to see what classmates had birthdays that month. And so that was a quick and easy way them to celebrate their students' birthdays. But any way that you choose, whatever activity that you choose, I'm telling you that building positive and appropriate relationships with your students will go a long way in helping to develop a positive classroom management system. KIP tip number 2. Establish clear boundaries and expectations. Now, I'm about to show you something that I did in my class. Now again, I am a former special education teacher and I specialize in emotional and behavior disorders. So for me, getting ahead of some of those challenging behaviors was crucial. I could not wait until something erupted in my classroom to respond. I needed to be proactive versus reactive. And if you want me to share some tips on managing disruptive behaviors, go ahead and leave a comment in the video and I will be glad to share those tips with you. But one proactive measure that I did was I created a student handbook. And so, in my student handbook, and this is what it looked like, I printed this out and I placed one in a binder just like this one, and I put the binders in each desk. Again, my classroom size was small, so I was able to do this pretty easily, okay? And just like an employee has an employee handbook that outlines the company's policies, expectations, I also created one for my classroom, and it did the same. And so, in the handbook, I drafted a Dear Valued Student letter. I had an About This Handbook page. I included our general rules and expectations of the classroom. I also included the consequences, so that way they knew what to expect if they broke any of the rules. They also knew what to expect when I was going to reward the class or acknowledge positive behavior. And then the biggest section of my classroom handbook was the do's and the don'ts. Now this outlined every possible scenario I could think of that could potentially cause disruption in my room. I talked about how should they enter my classroom, how they should exit my classroom, what the expectation was for submitting classwork, homework. I included things like how to work together collaboratively on projects. It even included in here what my expectation was whenever there was a substitute teacher. I did not leave any guesswork. And on the first day of school, we went over this handbook. We also reviewed it again whenever a new student was added to the roster. We reviewed it whenever I made revisions to the handbook. And we also reviewed it the first day of the second semester of the year. Why did I do this? Because again, I feel and I believe truly that we need to be proactive versus reactive when it comes to challenging and disruptive behaviors. I also believe in doing this because I know that students crave, they desire, whether they know it or not, consistency, structure, and fairness. And in creating this handbook, in creating processes and procedures that addressed all of that, and they knew, if nothing more, that I was going to be consistent, I was going to be fair, and I was going to be structured in my expectations of them. I was also going to communicate that, and they knew that there was no partiality. They knew that I wasn't being biased to any student, that I was being consistent across the board. And they actually held me accountable to this. I remember one time a student raised their hand and they asked me a question like, Miss Smith, that was my maiden name at the time, so that's why it says Miss Smith's student handbook. Can I charge my phone? And I said no. And do you know what they did? They went into their desk, they pulled out this handbook, and I watched them sit there. I don't see that in here. And so I said, oh, okay, all right. Yeah, you can go ahead and charge it today. revise this handbook tomorrow. And that's exactly what I did, right? And so I went in, I revised the handbook, and then we went over the new rule the next day. And so again, you want to make sure that you establish clear boundaries and expectations for your class. Last but certainly not least, KIP tip number 3, create a safe learning environment. What do I mean by that? Well, of course, we want students to know that putting their hands or objects on each other is not acceptable, right? I think that's a general school rule, right? But when I say safe, I mean, are students willing to take risks in their classroom? Do they feel comfortable in trying something new or different? If not, I would ask you to think about, is your learning environment safe? Creating a safe learning environment lets your students know that you celebrate progress over perfection, that you celebrate their growth, right? It's not about getting 100s. It's not about being perfect, but it's about growing. It's about them discovering skills, discovering things about themselves that they didn't know, right? It's about building their confidence. And so you want to make sure that your environment is safe, that students aren't afraid, right, to raise their hand and to try and answer the question, even though it's wrong, right? And one of the ways that you can do that is by teaching your other students that it's not okay to laugh. Okay, we support each other, right? It's not okay to roast each other or to make fun of each other, right? That is not okay in your classroom. So that means that it's not okay for us to be sarcastic with our students, right? To make them feel less than, right? That's not creating a safe learning environment. When students know that it's okay to take a risk, right? To try something different, right? To raise their hand and to volunteer, right? To be engaged, then that will help build their confidence, which will help them in turn academically, and we will begin to see progress and growth in their test scores and also just in their performance overall. And so that's it. These are your KIP tips for classroom management. Again, these are just starting points to help you to determine whether or not what you currently have in place is effective, whether or not what you currently have in place is benefiting you, if it's benefiting your students. If you have any more tips that you want to share on classroom management that you have found to be successful in helping your students to grow academically,